I'm thrilled to be hosting today's live session. My name is Savi and I'm a member of social work team at Brain Bristle, where I work with autistic children in awareness and promoting inclusion. I'm delighted to introduce our guest today, Dr. Pete. Hi, Mr. Pete.
Hello. Oh, there we are.
Hi. 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 How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. Okay, so
Good.
let's start it. We would love to know a little background about you, your journey, your story, what got you here.
Yeah, sure. I'm autistic and
Yeah.
ADHD. I was diagnosed autistic back in 2017, so 8 years ago, and ADHD was last year, so that's more recent. And yeah, these days I'm an author. The main thing that I do is I write books, like the one behind me, just there on the wall. I write books about autism, about what autism is, how it is to be autistic, and how the world could be a little bit more friendly towards autistic
Yes.
people. Um, and yeah, along with that, I do a lot of this kind of thing, podcasts and interviews and radio and all that kind of thing. And a lot of speaking engagement, so speeches, talks, training, that kind of thing. So yeah, busy trying to educate the world really about what autism is, what neurodiversity means, and what people can do to help neurodivergent people. Who might be in your family, or you might work with them, or you might teach them, or they might be your parents.
Yeah.
They could, who knows?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me. On top of that, I used to be a teacher. I was an English teacher for a long time, and I'm also a parent. So I've got an autistic child.
Okay. That's amazing. That's so great. I also would like to know what led to get your diagnosis at such a late age, and what changed for you afterwards. Did it surprise you?
It kind of did. Yeah, I mean, obviously, by the time I got the diagnosis, I kind of, understood what was going on by that point. But when I first started looking at what autism really was, before I got the diagnosis, I was actually quite surprised at how wrong I'd got it. My understanding of autism back then was very poor.
Yeah.
I didn't know much about it at all. And I thought that the fact that I was a teacher, the fact that I had a, stable job, that I had a family, that I lived independently, I thought that meant that I couldn't be autistic because, I don't know what it's like over there, but in the UK at that time, there wasn't all that much information. You didn't hear about it much. So I was really surprised to find out that autistic people could have jobs and could have families and could do this and that. And that was the biggest shock. The reason why I got diagnosed, like so many autistic adults, was because of becoming a parent. It's really common. It's a very common pathway, I think, that happens. You become a parent, and then either the child is diagnosed early on, and then you are diagnosed as a result of that because you kind of think, oh, I'm exactly the same as them, so I must be too. Or, as in my case, becoming a parent is so enormously stressful and changes your life so much that you really struggle. You get quite ill, mentally ill, and I had to deal with depression and all kinds of things because, as it turned out, my autistic brain had created a lovely routine for myself. I had a nice daily routine and I tried to keep my stresses minimal. And then there's a baby around and everything changes. You can't just go for a lovely coffee in the morning like you always do. You can't sleep normally. You have got all that extra noise. and smell and responsibility, and for me it really it was a hugely difficult thing to adapt to, very tricky. So I looked for explanations, and that's when I looked into autism, found out more about it, and then yeah, gradually got the diagnosis.
Right. So, as you said, like, still it has been ignored. Even here, be it UK, India, it's been ignored
Yeah,
all over the place.
yeah.
So, uh, as a spectrum, it's been very difficult to find out, be a parent
Mhm.
or a child. Um, and so you said you also work with autism advocacy, your books, you've
Yeah.
written. Yeah. So, what do you think? How we can widen the impact of your work?
Oh, well, I mean, just generally, what autistic advocates tend to need more than anything, including myself and all those other many advocates that are out there, we just need to be we just need to be listened to. We want people sharing our stuff on social media. We want people reading our books, ideally, and sharing them, passing them on. The happiest I ever am is when I find out, when I talk to somebody and they say, "Oh, I loved your book. I actually gave it to one of my friends, and now they're reading it."
Yeah.
I love that, because it's like your book has had, I mean, it's having a knock-on effect.
Right.
It's influence is growing and growing, and I think that's brilliant. So that kind of thing is really useful. And don't stick to just the one person. Like, I like to think that I give good information, but I'm a white British bloke, who's like 42. So my experience of autism is very different to somebody else's. Autistic women, autistic people from other backgrounds, autistic people of different ages. Get a really wide view, follow lots of different people with different lives, and find out how their autistic experience might be similar in some ways, but also how it might be different. That I think is something that nearly all advocates would want to see, that kind of broad curiosity about everybody's experience.
And when we talk about advocacy, we also talk about a lot of stereotypes
Yes.
related to. So, what are some stereotypes in the space of autism, and especially men, that you'd like to burst or confirm? Uh,
There's so many. Yeah, it's a lot of my time is spent bursting stereotypes, as you say, because there are so many of them. With regarding autism, autistic men in particular, I suppose, well, there are quite a few. I mean, I would say that one of the biggest ones that affects me personally is the belief that autistic people don't feel empathy and are quite emotionless. That this is a very common myth, stereotype that is always floating around in various places. You hear it quite often, and it's quite stressful when you yourself are autistic to know that people are viewing you in that way, when actually, it's like, well, I'm really empathetic. I'm a tremendously empathetic person, and I don't know what to do with my empathy. I'm hopeless at that, but I feel it. Might not know what to say, but I feel it very deeply, and I think that's very different to not feeling it at all. So that's a big one for me. And like I say, this whole thing about not feeling emotion is interesting, because I think that myth is probably built on the I don't know whether you've heard of alexithymia, which is a kind of condition whereby you struggle to identify what emotion you're feeling, and you might not know why you're feeling it. So you might kind of know you feel bad, but you don't know what kind of bad.
right.
Like, am I angry? Am I sad? Am I
Yeah.
disappointed? Am I jealous? I don't know. And because of that, you can't work out what caused it. So that's quite difficult. And I think that might, because that happens to a lot of
Yeah.
autistic people. But the thing is, just because you can't describe an emotion
Hmm.
doesn't mean you're not feeling it. You're still feeling
Yeah.
it. Do you know what I mean? It's just you can't talk
Yeah.
about it as easily. So yeah, for me, they're big myths. That, and finally, the big myth that we don't have a sense of humor. I hate that, because like some of the funniest people I know are autistic, and so many autistic people have a really excellent sense of humor. So yeah, I think that's a big one.
Right. Right. Yeah, I mean, yes, communication is a big part of it. Like that's the
Yeah.
most autistic. Like I work with autistic children, and they really struggle with communication majorly.
Yeah.
And what would you say struggles that you have faced because of your autism, and what are some strengths that you think only might have been because you are on the spectrum?
I think in terms of struggles, a big one for me is probably more related to being ADHD. It's interesting being autistic and ADHD.
Right.
Sometimes it's difficult to know which one is causing it. But for me, my organisation is quite poor. I always like to joke that, I mean, obviously I had to cancel this before because I was poorly, but equally it's often the case where I have to cancel things because I've forgotten about them and suddenly it's like, oh no, I'd forgotten about that and now I've got to do it. And that's obviously very stressful because I don't like letting people down and people don't like being let down. Um, and I'm doing all of this by myself. I'm doing all my work mostly by myself. I don't have like a PA or anybody helping me. So things go wrong quite often. So that's a challenge. That is a challenge. And I also find, as you mentioned about communication, I mean, obviously I'm very communicative in terms of spoken word. Not all autistic people are. Some autistic people communicate in very different ways. But even though I'm very communicative, I do struggle with it because I really struggle with working out and knowing what other people want from me. Like working out what are they trying to get.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're trying to like get money or something, but like, are they trying to ask for help, or are they trying to ask for support, or are they trying to ask me to do something for them? I just don't know, and that's quite a common autistic experience. We just sort of don't really know what's going on there. We like things to be really direct, just clear. Like, if you want me to make you a drink, just tell me. If you want me to lend you £10, just tell me. That's how we tend to like it. And in the UK especially, I'm not sure what the situation would be over in India, but in the UK, you might have heard of the fact that British people are very bad at asking directly for things. We tend to hint, like, oh, it's very hot today, isn't it? I haven't had a drink for ages, rather than, I need a drink, please get me a drink. And for me, that's very, I think in some other countries where people are more
Yeah.
direct, I think maybe I'd be a little bit happier. you know? But in terms of strengths, I mean, goodness, I mean, a big strength for a lot of autistic people, including myself, would be kind of focus, ability to focus on things, and finding interest in so many things. Like things just grab my interest quite easily, and I can get lost by reading up on them or learning about them or researching them. And that's when I feel happiest, when I'm, I don't know, reading on Wikipedia about volcanoes or something that I haven't read about for a long time. I feel very calm and kind of, just good. It's a nice feeling. And that's a big strength because it means that we often learn very quickly because we're so often absorbing information. We gather information quite rapidly, which is why many people that know an autistic person will know that they will often have incredible amounts of knowledge
Yes.
about strange things, like odd things that no one else talks about, which I think is really nice. I think that's wonderful. I think it's great to have people in the world that have loads of knowledge about strange things. I think that's
Yeah.
good.
I mean, I work with one of the kids, and he's also like he's interested in animals, and then he picks up so many things which I don't even know about. So sometimes I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I don't know, I have to read up about it. So that's
Yes, and it's
all.
it's great, learning from kids like that. If you're a teacher or if you're working with children,
Yeah,
so often we're the ones teaching them.
yeah,
We're giving them all this information. It's so nice when it goes the other way
yeah.
and they're teaching us stuff. I love that. I think that's
Same.
great.
Sometimes I don't know, like if I'm teaching him or he's teaching me. So
Mm,
it's so interesting.
absolutely.
Um, So, one thing also I would like to ask you, if you could change one thing in the world to make a better place or the world better for autistic or the autistic spectrum, what would it be?
I'm a great believer that most people want to be kind and helpful to autistic people. I don't think many people out there like want to be mean to us or want to be cruel. I think it's mostly accidental. And usually it's because people just don't know about it. They haven't read anything about it. They haven't seen it on the TV. They haven't heard about it on the radio. So when they meet an autistic person, they don't know what to do. They just think that we're strange and we might kind of freak them out a little bit. So if I could do anything, I would love if all of a sudden, just instantly, if everyone knew the basics about autism. You know, like in the same way that we all know the basics about, I don't know, the fact that people need to eat and drink. Like everyone on earth knows that food and drink is quite important. If everyone could know what autism was and how autistic people work, my word, that would change everything, because I think then we autistic folk could just go around being autistic. We wouldn't have to pretend anymore. We'd just be able to just relax a little bit and just be like, hey, look at me, I'm autistic, I'm different.
Yeah.
I do things differently, I talk in a slightly different way. I might do communication in different ways, and I might experience the world in a different way. But that's all cool because you all understand and you know about it, and I know about you. And that would be wonderful. if that could be reality, that would be so good. And that's why we all, all of us writers and advocates, that's why we do what we do.
Okay, that makes sense. There are some questions in the chat that I
Mm-hmm.
would like to. Um, so Devangna has written, have you ever compared your learning focus to a non-autistic person and seen how autistic people fare in comparison?
Not directly with myself, no, because it would be hard to judge that, because I'd be so focused on what I was learning on that I probably wouldn't even notice what the other person was doing. But certainly as a teacher, I noticed it a lot. Even before I knew about autism, I would notice this very significant difference in how people pay attention to things and how people focus on their learning or focus on a task or a job or something. I mean, it's not always the case, but very often what you would notice is that autistic individuals can sit and do it for longer. They might be a bit harder to bring back out of the job or the task because they're so focused on it, they can't just stop. They you have to very gently move them onto something new. Whereas non-autistic people don't seem to have that so much. They can, they'll stop doing one thing and just start doing another thing straight away. That's fine. So you do notice that, you really do. And if you work with autistic children, or if you have autistic children, you'll know all about that. Getting them to stop
Yes.
doing one thing, and then, time to clean your teeth, or time for a bath, or time to go for a walk. And it's hard because they're focused on something and they can't just stop. There needs to be time,
Yeah.
to gradually move from one thing to another. And that's often not understood by people, which is a shame, because it's actually quite straightforward. All it means is that we just need a bit of warning, and a bit more time to switch, and we'll usually be a bit better off.
Um, Also, a few questions about how teenage years in autism or as a boy to adulthood, how would that look like?
Oh, goodness me. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it will be different for all autistic people. I was personally very much an autistic teenager. I mean, obviously I didn't know I was autistic, but looking back, I was an autistic teenager who just wanted to stay out of trouble.
Yeah.
I desperately wanted to just go under the radar. I didn't want anyone to notice me. I didn't want any fuss. I didn't want any bother. I just wanted to survive, So I didn't get into any trouble. I mean, most teenagers over here, over in the UK, they'll start going out to pubs and start drinking alcohol, when they're about 15, 16. I didn't really start that until I was about 18, to be honest, because, I just didn't want that extra stress in my life, you know. And so I was weirdly well behaved. I was a very well behaved teenager, and that is one way that some autistic people do manage those difficult teenage years. But others will go a very different route. They might become more rebellious. Rebellion is quite common in autistic people. We do rebel against authority quite often. Even I, wanting to be as well behaved as possible, would still get very angry with teachers if I thought they weren't being fair. And I'd put my hand up and say, no, 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 sir, that's wrong. You got that wrong. It wasn't their fault at all. It was their fault. And yeah, so obviously for some teenagers, they can end up going off in quite interesting directions with that. They might become quite tricky. They might, get into trouble with the police, or they might join groups and become, protesters, or, it could lead to very good things. If you think about someone like Greta Thunberg, the Swedish school autistic, she's in her 20s now, but, her rebellion against authority was, I think quite a positive one. It certainly didn't do any harm. Whereas others, of course, might start vandalizing things and who knows what. So the thing about autistic teenage years is, who knows? It could go in any direction. That there is no set autistic teenage style. It will depend very much on their personality, just deep down. But typically, yes, you'll often get people a bit like me who just want to stay out of trouble. You might find people who are very rebellious, and you might find people who are sensory seeking. Let's just put it like that. Autistic people are very sensitive sensorily, to noise and light and things like that. And what a lot of people forget is that this works both ways. And sometimes because of that sensitivity, we actually want that because we like the feel of it. So you get a lot of autistic people, for example, who love the feeling of loud music, or who are fascinated by the effects of drugs or alcohol because of the sensory aspect. So therefore, that those paths can end up becoming quite relevant, but not always by any stretch. It's good to just have an open mind, and just see what happens to your teenage kid when they reach 13, 14, 15. Yeah.
I'm sure it's a journey, all sorts of. One thing is that, did you struggle with common autism things like eye contact, stimming, social emotional reciprocity? I just would love to know that.
Yeah, to an extent. Autistic people and eye contact is a really interesting topic. We're often, of course, made to do it, aren't we? A lot of the time, autistic people are forced. In cultures where eye contact is important, anyway. I suppose there are cultures in the world where you don't make eye contact anyway, and that must be quite easy for autistic people. They must feel quite at home in those cultures. But yeah, autistic people generally don't tend to like making eye contact. It feels too intense. I gave a talk last night in the library in town, just a free talk, to parents, and I explained to them that actually making eye contact with people you don't know when you're autistic would be a little bit like making you hold their hand when you don't know them. Do you know what I mean? Like, too intimate, too familiar, too intense. You wouldn't hold the hand of a stranger, so why would you look them in the eye? Because to autistic people, looking at other people's eyes feels that same intensity, that same intimacy. So, for example, I can look in the eye of my daughter because she's my daughter. We have no problem with that. I can look in the eye of very close friends and, romantic relationships, partners. But everybody else, I don't want to. I'd rather not, I force myself to because I don't want people to think I'm lying to them or not listening, but I don't like it. I would be much happier if people were just cool with not making eye contact. That would make me much happier indeed. In terms of other things like communication, reciprocation, that kind of thing, yeah, I struggle when things are ambiguous, when things are vague. I don't like that. Like I mentioned earlier, I like things to be nice and clear and written down and focused, and I struggle when I, as I say, when I don't know what people want me to do.
Right.
or what they want me to say. But often, part of it's my doing, but part of it is their doing. They need to be clearer. They need to say what they mean, and it works both ways.
Yeah.
Both sides of the conversation have to take responsibility for that, I think. Yeah.
So, and what about stimming?
Mm.
So-
Yes, yeah. Stimming's an interesting one because most of my stimming that I used to do as a child, I don't do anymore because obviously you get told off, you get criticized, you get told to stop. So all of my stims these days are quite hidden. I will play with a fiddle toy in my pocket, for example, so no one notices. Or I'll fiddle my toes, I'll just kind of move my toes in my shoes. Nobody ever notices that either. But when I'm on my own, or even actually when I'm driving, especially if I'm driving with my daughter, maybe to school, every morning, we often stim together, but we stim with noises, verbal stimming. So we'll just make weird noises at each other just to amuse ourselves. If anyone was in the car with us, they'd think we were, totally cuckoo, but we're not. We're just, well, I mean, maybe, but we're just having fun. It's a nice way to get some of that energy out. She's nervous about school. I'm probably nervous about, I don't know, work that day or something. So we, make beeping noises at one another because it makes us feel good, and that's definitely stimming. So it's about, I think it's important that autistic people stim, even though it is difficult, even though you do get a lot of criticism for it from, neurotypical people. I think where we can, we ought to. I think it's good for us. I think it's very good for
Right.
us.
Okay, that's great. The chat also wants to know if we can talk about masking and
Oh, yes.
yeah, and also the balance of trying not to affect mental health, but also preparing your autistic child for this world.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's a delicate balance to get right. Absolutely, because on the one hand, yes, you want to make sure that your autistic child is mentally healthy, but on the other hand, you don't want them to be bullied, treated badly, etc. So you've got to get the balance. So first of all, with autistic masking, first of all, you can't really avoid it. You're going to have to autistic people tend to have to mask sometimes. I can't imagine a situation where you'd never have to do it. um, but it is important as a parent, as a teacher, as an adult around that child, to make it as minimal as you possibly can. Just, and who knows how much that will be. I'm not saying that you've got to remove all masking time, but just wherever you can, if there is an opportunity to let the child just be themselves, take it. Take it. Because every minute that they're not having to mask is good. It's beneficial.
Yes.
Because it's just that little bit of extra energy for other things. It just helps a little, So do try and find those opportunities to not mask. And when it comes to masking that probably does have to happen, or certainly, that will have to happen for a time at least,
Right.
help the child understand that that is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Because I think that creates a healthier relationship with masking. Because what I've found is that a lot of autistic people mask without even realizing that we're doing it. We do it as a safety mechanism, to stop ourselves getting bullied or treated badly, but we don't really understand what it is we're doing. And therefore we don't do it in the healthiest ways. Does that make sense? We might fall into bad habits and do it too much, or become yes people who just agree to everything, to stay out of trouble. That's not the healthiest way to mask. So if you actually talk to your child once they're old enough to understand the concept about masking and explain what's actually going on there and how to maybe do it more safely and to do it in a way that is more sustainable, that can be good. And also to explain to them, I was talking about this last night too, that when it comes to masking in terms of social communication, so, trying to communicate like a non-autistic person,
Right.
like eye contact and small talk and all that stuff, to actually explain that it's almost like teaching a foreign language.
Yeah.
It's like, I've got, this is how I approach it with my daughter. I'll say to her, if you want to be able to communicate successfully with neurotypical people, you might have to do this, this, and this. You know, it's like saying, if you want to communicate successfully with French people, you're going to need to learn some French. You know, it's the same idea. So it's like the reason that's important is because it makes it clear that your natural autistic communication style is fine, because it is actually good. We communicate well with each other. You know, we really do.
Yeah.
So we don't want to lose that. We don't want that to be squashed. We want to keep that, but also learn the other ways too.
Right.
You know, so that we can navigate the world and more safely and more knowledgeably, rather than just squashing our real selves down and just being a mask all of the time, which of course is very unhealthy, very dangerous.
Right. Yeah, I think it should also like help to be more independent and probably more creative that way, because I've seen autistic people being so creative.
Yes.
That would really, so yeah, makes sense. That's really great. Um, so one of the questions is, was it hard for your family and friends to accept your autism diagnosis? And as we talked about it before, is there as much stigma about autism in the UK as there is here in India?
So it wasn't particularly difficult because, well, I don't think it was, because I was actually quite excited by my diagnosis, because it explained so much, and it was like this huge bit of news for me that I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Wow, I know this about myself now. So I told everybody, I think in my experience, all of my closest friends were fairly cool with it. You know, they just ran with it. You know, oh, fair enough. You know, and they've all tried in a really nice way to adapt to it. So, for example, one close friend of mine, if I go and see them, if I go up north to go and visit them for for a drink or a meal or for Christmas or something, they will say to me, oh, let me know if you want to just go and have a lie down, or if you just want to leave and, get a quiet spot, or something like that. And that's lovely. That's just a really nice thing to say. It makes you feel very safe. My parents were absolutely okay with it. I mean, my dad has since realized that he's autistic too. My mum could well be ADHD. I'm not really sure. My sister's definitely autistic and probably ADHD as well. So it's actually helped open up a really important conversation in my family, I think. We've all realized something about ourselves, which is really healthy, I think, a really good thing that's happened. In terms of stigma between here and the UK, between the UK and India, I don't know really. The one sense that I do get from what I see of what's happening in India on social media and LinkedIn and all that kind of thing is that actually India does, I mean, I don't know, you might laugh at this, this might be completely wrong, but India does seem to be ahead in some area. India's doing well, I think, in terms of neurodivergent understanding. I tend to put it up there with Ireland, the UK sometimes, and possibly other countries like Canada, perhaps, as being a bit more open-minded towards it and having really good quality, like charities and organisations that are doing good work, to try and help autistic people have a better life. So I don't know. I mean, but then, India might have really good charities, but in terms of the stigma of the person on the street, I mean, I don't know. In the UK, there is still some. I mean, I went to this talk in the library yesterday with my I'm Autistic and Proud t-shirt on, okay, because it's quite warm here at the moment. And I got shouted at by two people. One was a man in a van driving past who just kind of like this, like insultingly, and another was I don't know, like a teenager, laughing at it, because oh look, he's autistic, like this. So that's not great, that's really disappointing. But generally speaking, things are better here than they were. Things are improving. It's slow. It's a slow process, and it will presumably be even slower for yourselves, of course, because the population is so enormous that's a lot of people to reach. That's a lot. Whereas, I was in Ireland last week, and Ireland is doing really well in lots of areas. And of course, it's a fairly small country. It's only a few million people. When you're talking billions to, educate and get this information to, that's tricky. That's going to take time. So, but I think we can all be. I think there are a lot of countries currently on Earth on earth, that can be reasonably proud of the fact they are making some progress here. They're making decent progress. Obviously, it would be good if it could be sped up a little bit, if we could make it a bit faster, and if we could get some funding, and if we could get things, really moving. But things are better than they used to be, and I have to remember that to keep myself optimistic. Otherwise I get very depressed, very worried about the future, especially with what's happening in America, of course, where things are looking a little bit less positive in terms of autistic people's rights and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I have to try and stay cheerful.
Right. So I think in India it's mostly seen as a problem,
Yeah,
probably, or yeah, considering the population, there's hardly any diagnosis for lots of people.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, it's a struggle here to. So yeah, another question that comes up is, what kind of school did you go to, and what do you think about special schools for autism versus inclusive classrooms?
Yeah, I went to a mainstream school the whole time that I was at school because, of course, it wasn't identified. I was very high masking. I carried around an awful lot of anxiety. I thought that anxiety was normal. I thought that, every child felt that scared every single day. Turns out, of course, they didn't. But I did. So, but I, like I say, my desire to just get through things and just, put my head down and, work through the school day meant that I went unnoticed, really. I just kind of sneaked through school, I suppose. But it wasn't easy though, because obviously that involved a lot of masking, it involved a lot of anxiety, and it probably started my relationship with depression. Even though at that time I don't think I was depressed, I don't think I had depression as a teenager, but I think it certainly started then in some ways, and then grew as I got older. In terms of inclusive or special schools, well, it's an interesting question. Ultimately, it depends entirely on whether the inclusive mainstream schools are truly inclusive. Because I think if they genuinely were, if you genuinely had mainstream schools, primary and secondary, and universities and colleges too, that truly understood autism, just got it, figured it out, knew what autistic kids were like and, what to expect and how they're going to behave and what you can do to help them and sensory needs and communication differences. If mainstream schools knew all of that,
Right.
I think for most students, they would be fine. I genuinely do. I think that that would be enough for the vast majority of students who were, for example, just autistic. If you've got other co-occurring conditions, learning disabilities, etc., then maybe a more specialist provision might be more useful or more suitable. But even then, not necessarily. I think though that we're not anywhere near that yet. Most mainstream schools actually don't know much about it at all. In which case, specialist schools are better because there's no alternative really. So many autistic kids try and go to mainstream schools, but they don't even have their basic needs met. Just basic stuff like, I don't know, like not being forced to look people in the eye. I mean, that to me is so obvious and simple and basic that any school teacher and head teacher and school authority should just be able to say, hey, you know what, guys, let's not force autistic people to look us in the eyes. Let's just not do that anymore. That should be so easy to do, but they don't do it. They don't. So for that reason and all the other reasons, mainstream schools currently can be very hostile places, very scary places for autistic kids, which is such a shame because it's so avoidable. It really wouldn't take much to adapt mainstream schools into a more neurodivergent friendly space. And that's what my next book is all about. But that's not coming out for another year or so yet. But yeah, that's what I'm focusing on at the moment in my writing.
That's a So we do work with mainstream schools, like we work
Hmm.
with inclusive classrooms. So we are trying to do that.
Good.
Hopefully, it works out.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So I think the last question for the day would be, what has
Mhm.
been your work with others in the community on the spectrum, or those playing the role of caregivers for them?
Sorry, we cut out just in the middle of that question, so I missed the middle part. Could
So,
you repeat it,
so,
please?
so what has been your work with the community on the spectrum, others, and also the those who are playing the role of the caregivers, parents,
Okay,
teachers, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I work a lot in collaboration with other neurodivergent people. I do podcasts with some, you know, we write collaboratively together. We often obviously all meet up at conferences and things like that. You know, the trip to Ireland that I was on last week was an autistic conference led by autistic people, organized by an autistic organization, which was brilliant, you know, just fantastic. And we all had a great time, and it was nice to meet people and to chat and to then run away and hide, you know, because we were all tired. So yeah, there's a lot of collaboration and working together in the advocacy community, which I think is really, really beneficial. It can be difficult because we're often quite isolated. You know, we often do a lot of our work online, like this, for example, but we do try to do things together where we can. In terms of working with parents and caregivers, I mean, like last night's talk that I organised just for, you know, my local library, that kind of thing I think is really important. Just getting out there and talking to parents, giving them that information, helping them understand what parenting can look like when you've got autistic children. And, you know, I also do a course called Kahoo, which is again based in Ireland. It's a training course that was designed by Irish autistic people, and that's for parents. That's basically training for parents of autistic children, and a lot of it is basically spent saying it's okay to parent differently. You know, don't feel pressure to parent like everybody else. You know, if you haven't got the energy and if your child doesn't want to go on a trip to somewhere at the weekend, then don't. You know, it's okay to just stay at home and relax and rest and recuperate, you know, ready for school on Monday. It's that kind of thing, you know, giving people permission to be different and to deal with things in a different way, which I think is really key. But yeah, you know, parents are often the ones that need the most support in my experience. You know, no one teaches you how to be a parent anyway. And definitely no one ever teaches you to be a parent of an autistic child. You know, you just have to try and figure it out, you know, and I think wherever we can help with that as autistic adults ourselves and autistic parents ourselves, then that's really helpful and useful.
I think that's beautiful. That parents should be okay to be different.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, I think that's it for today. I don't think there are any more questions on the chat as well. It was lovely talking to you. It's been amazing. We
Thank
learned
you.
about autism and ADHD also. You
Yes,
being
of
yeah.
course.
So yeah, that's it. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been really nice. So yeah, happy to do it again one day, perhaps.
Lovely. Yeah, we will do it definitely.
Okay. Thank you then.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.